Hey everybody, this episode of the podcast is being sponsored by my friends over at Real Mushrooms, my friend Jeff Chilton and his son Sky. I interviewed Jeff on one of the earlier episodes of this podcast. Really happy that they're sponsoring this podcast. They sell medicinal mushrooms, things like reishi, chaga, lion's mane, turkey tail, cordyceps. I think more and more people are becoming familiar with the truly amazing benefits of medicinal mushrooms on our physical, our mental, even our spiritual well-being. They're an amazing company. They're one of the few, if any, companies that's not only 100% organic, but 100% mushrooms, and that's really rare. A lot of companies have fillers or additives, or also important, it's not the mycelium that's grown on grain and mixed together, it's the actual mushroom, and that's a really rare thing. It's a really pure product. It's the only product, the medicinal mushroom product that I take. Super happy with them, super happy that they're sponsoring this podcast. If you'd like more information about them, you can check out their website at realmushrooms.com/universe to also receive 25% off of your first order.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to Cosmo Triggers with Sam. Today's episode is magical, and not just because there's a puppy here. Today I have Jason Grechanik back for our second episode. He's amazing. I met Jason, I think 2 years ago. He is a tabaquero, and he led a... Sorry, there's a dog chewing a bone right here. So if you're hearing that, that's what's happening. But I met Jason 2 years ago. Again, he's a tabaquero, and he led a tobacco diet with Merav Artzi, who is also a tabaquero. And they're just insanely brave people who are on a very deep and profound journey to heal. Something I think I hear Jason call the hero's journey. And it's the journey we're on when we are trying to, heal and make this world better than we found it. And finding truth and speaking truth and doing and acting and speaking from places that are life-giving and that promote life and promote beauty. And so this is an incredible episode that I can only describe as medicine, just potent medicine for the times. It's a narrative that I don't think we're hearing, and I think that's because the truth is very seldom spoken. So I hope you enjoy this episode today, and I know you will find some truth. And I'm just gonna let the episode speak for itself. Jason, thank you always for sharing your voice and your light and your love and your wisdom. And thanks for being here. Enjoy the episode.
I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
Jason, thank you for coming back. I always really appreciate your wisdom and insight and what you're seeing. And I originally wanted you on today because of like where we are politically in the world. And you brought up a lot of things for me. Kind of right after Trump Donald Trump won. And it feels like I'm coming from where I came from. Was it's like in our political world right now, and this probably has been the way it's been for a long time, which is you are on this side or you're on this side, and one side is good and one side is evil, and both think the same about the other. And I'm I'm starting to transition out of being on one side, and I'm like in this middle place where I can see that what it feels like is there is good and evil in everything and in everyone. And it isn't exclusive to one person or one group of people or one political side and or another. And something I was thinking about recently is that I don't think things are inherently evil. I think that things are actually, they tend to be good and come from a good place and like a really beautiful place. And perhaps like evil finds its way in anything and everything. And so you were sharing things from, I don't know, like, yeah, Joe Rogan got pretty, like, if you tell people you like Joe Rogan, it's pretty controversial. I don't know if it's like that in your world, but in my world, if you're like, hey, I watched Joe Rogan, someone's like, what? And they could like use that to like not be your friend anymore. And
Where you're coming from in New York, I can imagine that.
yeah. Actually, I'm in Pennsylvania now, and
Okay.
people are pretty. I think people like Joe Rogan here, but yeah, I mean, outside of this bubble, it could be pretty scary. But sorry, this is going to be a long-winded thought, and then you can take the stage. But yeah, that like this is good and this is bad, and I with Joe Rogan for a while, I was like, wow, he's like, there's like all these words that can be used. Like, I happened to watch him the other day because I like this guy, Duncan Trussell, and I haven't watched podcasts actually in a long time, but it was number 666 and he had Joe Rogan on, and I was like, all right, I have to watch this. So they're talking about evil. And it was interesting because Duncan has a view similar to mine of that I don't think anyone is one is better than the other or whatever. And Joe kind of came from this place a lot of like the left is bad, the extreme left is bad, which I guess maybe anything extreme might be detrimental or harmful. And there was this part of me that's like, well, isn't it, can't we see that maybe everything got tainted, but also can we see the good in everything, that it isn't all inherently bad? What is evil? And I guess you brought up, you said something like, and I don't want to misquote you, so please correct me, like something along the lines of, let's look at why most people in America voted for Donald Trump. Like, that's the way that it is. That's what happened. And maybe we should look at why. And it was really interesting. The other night, I had a really powerful dream. I woke up in the middle of the night and I wrote it all down about, I saw why people voted for him, and I saw him, and I saw how being like it was interesting. There was like a woman in my dream who was a guide, and she was like guiding me, and she was like, can you imagine being, she like made me be the president. And it was kind of this amplified version of when we put ourselves out there in the world, right? And we let people see us. And to be the president, you are seen by almost the entire world. Everyone knows you. And there's where I feel like I'm a microcosm of that, where if I put myself out in the world, maybe like, right, only a few people are seeing me. Most people have nice things to say when they see me and they can resonate with me. But there are, you know, a few people who will be like, I disagree with what you're saying and I think you're stupid, and or whatever kind of thing they put on you, right? Like a pain. And then I was the president, and how you are receiving intense hatred from people. Like people say, really, they were projecting really so much pain onto one person. And also on the other side, immense love and like kind of they hold you up to a standard. And if you have your own pain and your that maybe isn't processed, like that could be like, of course you would come from places, you would do things that maybe aren't the kindest or come from a place of heart. You would do things to like get acceptance or feel love, and maybe in the way that you learned love is. So I know I just said so many things, but basically that I think it's hard to be in that place. And I think people, I've also recently got in touch with shame, something that I feel immense shame about, that feels like really scary to talk about. And I think that was really important to get in touch with, because I think I think maybe most people feel shame. There's something like, I see it in my family, and there's like things people are in denial about that they don't want to admit, and they'll almost like, right, like be like, that didn't happen. That's not true. Like my own family members, like things that did happen, and you say, hey, this happened, and they'll be like, no, it didn't. And it's like, wow, really? And really that it's almost like they can't admit that that thing happened because it's so painful, right? Like you'd have to go through this whole process of shame and grief. And how perhaps people really resonate with Donald Trump because, you know, and I don't even know what the truth is, right? When they say he did this and he did this, like maybe he didn't. But if he did do it and he's saying, no, I didn't, no, they're lying. It felt like in the dream, people really resonated with him because it was this feeling of, oh, like they could resonate with, people are blaming him and he didn't do it, see? And he's saying, no, they're lying. And it's like, it gives them this sense of like, that they don't have to admit to something they did. Does that make sense? So I just laid out a whole buffet. If you want to pick a bit of everything or nothing or whatever, that's it for now.
Well, it's obviously a huge topic. You know, I think it's always interesting to start kind of at the root, and if to talk about politics would also to first be to define what that is. I believe the etymology of politics, it's a Greek word, and it means citizen. I'd imagine it's even like denizen, and it means like someone who's from within. So to be within something, and You know, there's just so many places or so many ways we could take this conversation, but like obviously that's a big part of people's meaning is to be part of something, to be within something, to feel self-identified with something. It's a fundamental part of humanity, whether I am Jason or you are Samantha, and the universe, the world that creates, to be a human, to be part of my family, my community, my tribe, my nation. However we view these things, there's a tremendous power to that. As you said, often as people begin to go on journeys into themselves, whether that's their own evolution or their own political evolution or any type of evolution, there's going to be something in that that's lonely, because inevitably, as you said, you're beginning to remove yourself from a certain community, from a certain group, and there's a certain safety in that, in that community, in that group. We as humans rely on that. I mean, the world is not inherently safe. That's also part of what you were speaking about in terms of the nature of good and evil. I lived in the Amazon for many years. Very few people, I think, would say that the Amazon is safe, and it's not to mean that it's like dangerous. It's a dangerous place to live, but there is danger there, and I think that's also part of what you were speaking about in terms of that sense of the nature of good and evil. Like the nature of the Amazon is life giving. It's abundance. It's beauty. It's astonishing, and there's danger. There's inherent danger there. I mean, I would imagine tens of thousands of children die every year of malaria there. That's a reality. There's all sorts of mosquito-borne illnesses. There's jaguars, there's anacondas, there's, many things that you have to be aware of. So I think, like you were saying, any sort of kind of hero's journey, archetypal evolution that we're going on, part of that journey is to remove ourselves from our environment, which provides safety to us. It provides wisdom. It provides knowledge. But there's also a limitation to that, and that's often the idea in spirituality of the ego, beginning to detach from the ego. It's not that we ever get rid of the ego. The ego is vital. It's part of the dualistic world. Without the ego, we don't exist. It's an essential part of being a human being. A human being is spirit that's made in flesh. And so part of being in the flesh, in the human body, is being in a world that's dualistic. When we begin to go on that journey, we are going to begin to isolate ourselves, and that's lonely, and that's a huge part of our journey for all of us. And that's a big part of, I think, if we're speaking specifically about politics, a huge part, I think, of also maybe what you're getting at is there's a huge part of fear as we begin to find our voice, to step away from our family, our tribe, our community, and to really think for ourselves. So much of who we are is also based on a word that I think is very beautiful, and it's often not used in our common vernacular, but is our cosmovision. And our cosmovision is shaped by our family, our societies, the stories that we tell ourselves, and those shape who we are, and there's a value to that. But also, as I was saying, it's inherent in the archetypal journey to begin to step away from that and to question the cosmovision, to question what is real, what is not real. And that's often a very scary place because you also begin to realize that perhaps many of the stories that you were told are not real. That was part of, I think, part of my journey, even growing up in the U.S., is I was very fascinated by Native Americans, by indigenous communities in the U.S., and I had a sense that the stories that I was being told about them were not completely true. Even like my father's generation grew up with kind of cowboys and the Indians were the bad guys and the cowboys were the good guys. that didn't make sense to me, because again, that's usually not the nature, as you said, of people. There's not
Mm,
usually good guys and bad guys. That's not how the world works, and yet that is the cosmovision of most people,
mm,
and we find
mhm,
comfort in that. It's very easy to other people to.
mhm,
That's kind of the dark side of the ego, or identification. Is there's me, there's my group, my people, my way of doing things, and anyone who's outside of that, whether we view it or not, there's something bad about them because they're not me. It means they're different. And that's the nature of war,
mhm,
both the internal and the external war. Um, so, yeah, always going on this journey is going to be a bit scary as we begin to question these things. Again, where, kind of where to take it from there. But even it's interesting because even you being in the US, I mean, we tend to have a two-party system, which a lot of people criticize, but kind of at its fundamental root, that also is the nature of duality. Do you
mm,
choose left or do you choose right?
mm,
Uh, is this policy good? Is it bad? I mean, most things do come down to a fairly binary choice. Um, I think one of the interesting things in the U.S. is we often get told that we live in a democracy, and that's not true.
mhm,
We don't pledge of allegiance to the democracy of the United States. We pledge allegiance to the Republic of
mhm,
the United States, and that's a beautiful philosophy. Democracy at its root is good for certain things, but at its primary level, it's not good because it's literally, it means rule by the majority.
mm,
So if you're a minority in any sense, then
mm,
democracy is terrible for you. And I think, as Ayn Rand said very beautifully, that the biggest minority in the world is the individual. To deny individual rights,
mm,
you can't claim to be a defender of a minority, and everyone is a minority.
mm,
That's uh, because no two people are the same,
mhm.
and so whatever your views are, there is no single other person, much less group of people in the world who are going to think like you.
Mhm,
And I think that's also a big root of our problem is we like to identify with certain teams and to go along with whatever that team says rather than actually thinking for ourselves,
mhm,
because there is going to be a divergence and you are going to find yourself isolated from any team, because again, every single human being has differing views. There are no single people who have ever had the same view, in the same way that no two people have the same skin color, in the same way that no two people have the exact same hair color, no two people have the exact same eye color, no two people have the exact same DNA. Never. I mean, that's an amazing thing to think about. In the
mhm.
history of the universe, there will never
Right.
be two people who are the same ever.
Mm,
It's literally
mhm.
impossible. You know, even with all of the AI and cloning and CRISPR, you will never be able to generate something that's exactly the same. So, I again, there's so many ways that this could be taken, but I think the nature of any sort of wisdom. I mean, this is kind of Buddhist philosophy, is also finding the middle road. That's the idea of wisdom, is to see
Mm,
things from both sides. And
mhm,
and and I think what you're talking about, so much of the division, it's not only in the U.S. but it's all over the world. I mean, I've been living in Peru the last decade or so, and I mean, there's huge division there, in
mm,
a similar way that there is in the U.S. People often like to kind of idealize other countries, but that division is at the root of humanity. It's
mm,
again, it's to see people as the other. Um, but wisdom is really, I think, being able to, they often say this in Buddhism, to put yourself in the shoes of someone else. And kind of all of this started as that post you said you saw of me, and And that's super important. Like, it's super important to realize why people do the things
Mm-hmm.
they do. If we don't do that, then we other them and we make them our enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very unwise place, not just in the consequences of doing that, but in the actual act of doing that. Like, there's no evolution there. There's no understanding
Mm-hmm.
there. There's no wisdom. There's no putting myself in the shoes of someone else. There's a very beautiful woman. Her name is Byron Katie,
Oh yeah.
and she has this beautiful quote, which is, "If you believed what Hitler believed, you would do exactly what he did."
Mm-hmm.
And that's very difficult for people to understand, because most people do like to look at the world in terms of good and evil, and that there's
Mm-hmm.
good people and there's evil people. But interestingly, the evil people never think they're evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost always good people think they're good, but everyone thinks they're good for the most part. So, the only way that you can understand the nature of evil is to go into that, and again, that's part of the archetypal hero's journey. That's what we're doing with this plant work, or any kind of self inquiry work, or any kind of deeper spiritual practice, is to really deeply understand the nature of humanity, and that the only way you understand the nature of humanity is to understand the nature of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and to see the darkness within yourself. And anyone who's not willing to do that will be the perpetrator of darkness.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fundamental principle of life. The only people who truly embody good are the ones who have the capacity to see the evil within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who denies that is the very people that will commit evil. And you see that in political systems around the world. I mean, the most evil political systems, I would say, namely things like communism, socialism, that committed the biggest atrocities. I mean, you're talking of hundreds of millions of people were murdered
Mm-hmm.
in the name of a common good. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. I mean, all of those killings were done in the name of a greater good. So again, those people thought they were good. They were killing. They were literally murdering people because they believed they were the good guys. Um, and that's that idea of righteousness. When we really believe that other people are evil, or that we don't understand them, then ultimately we're willing to kill them
Mm-hmm.
in the extreme. And in less extreme ways, where we shun them, we can name call them, we can put them in concentration camps, or even as we saw in COVID. I mean, how many people were willing to shun the other, the unvaccinated, or the dirty people, the people who were perpetuating this pandemic. I mean, we had a president who said this was a pandemic of the unvaccinated. I mean, that was a lie, and I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
really important to emphasize that was a lie. That is not
Mm-hmm.
true. Uh, and all of the evidence that's not only at the time, but that's come out since then has shown that. I mean, you know, luckily this won't get us censored now, because it's official policy of the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
government. But the vaccines never stop transmission. They were never tested to stop transmission. But that's that idea of being on a team, of blind faith, of not questioning, of just accepting things. And that's also what you were talking about. Like, what is true? What am I being told that's true? What's not true? And that can be a very scary journey to begin to go in that, because that will make you question everything. You're even talking about the Joe Rogan podcast. I mean, ultimately, that's where he started from. It was called, I think, Joe Rogan Questions Everything, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a beautiful thing. Also, as you said, as you begin to put yourself out there, you will be criticized. That's inevitable. Like, we can't not be criticized, because again, you as an individual are a minority, which means no two people will agree with you. And
Mm-hmm.
so ultimately, there's going to be 1, 10, 50, a million people who will criticize you, depending on what the scope of your
Mm-hmm.
outreach is. I think, unfortunately, like the nature of criticism is it's very often coming from, I think, as you were also alluding to, a place of deep wounding from someone, and that's not maybe necessarily always the case,
Mm-hmm.
because I think it also, like, it depends on the nature of criticism. Like, is the
Right.
criticism coming from a place of goodness? Is it coming from a place of a collective evolution, of a place of wanting to move forward, to correct
Mm-hmm.
mistakes, to do good, or is it coming at the expense of the well-being of someone else? And I think so much of the criticism nowadays is coming at the expense of people. It's trying to demonize them, which is even an interesting word. And this is where the etymology of things, the history, the
Mm-hmm.
stories, the cosmovisions are so important. Like, even that word demon, demon, ultimately it has to do with breath, with soul. Even in a more Christian or Judeo-Christian point of view, like the demon or Satan was God's closest angel. It was the angel that refused to leave God's side. So even in that sense, there's a sense of goodness there. It's what is the nature of good and evil, but kind of going back to that idea of criticism, is where is that criticism coming from? Is it trying to
Mm-hmm.
be constructive, or is it trying to be destructive? And I think that's the nature that we all have to look into. That's the nature of creation. Are our words, our thoughts, our actions, are they life-giving, or are they destructive? Are they trying to cause separation? And separation is the thing that divides us. Union is obviously the thing that unites us, and the nature of union is truth. It's life-giving. It's for all of our collective evolution. Um, and all of these things. That's where the nature of kind of all of these pendulums come from. I mean, the nature of politics is this kind of constant swinging between these two opposing forces. It's why, to be progressive or to be conservative, neither of them is the answer. They're
Mm-hmm.
both very specific tools that are very useful. When things become too conservative, we need more progressivism. When things become
Mm-hmm.
too progressive, we need more conservatism. They both have their role. I think the problem is most people, they identify with one of those two. So I
Mm-hmm.
am a conservative, and even in the face of overwhelming evidence that maybe something I believe in is not true, I hold on to my view. Or the opposite, I'm a progressive. So, but even in the nature of overwhelming evidence, I'm going to hold
Mm-hmm.
on to my view. And that's, again, that's the nature of the individual, and why ultimately, I would say in general, it's quite deleterious to be part of a team, because all of life is constantly evolving.
Mm-hmm.
The nature of being a progressive is very different from the nature of being a progressive 3 decades ago. The nature of being a conservative today is very different from the nature of being a conservative 3 decades ago. And everything is evolving, and that's super important. And it's important to continue in that evolutionary process. Uh, Even in the nature of U.S. politics, like, maybe some people are aware of it, some people may not be. But even if you look at that kind of dualistic nature of parties, I mean, the Democratic Party was the party of slavery. A lot of people don't realize that, but usually the answer that's given is that, well, and that was the nature of the Republican Party. It was the abolitionist party. It was the party that was
Mm-hmm.
against slavery. But often kind of the cosmovision now is that, well, maybe it's the Republican Party that's more, whatever, racist or misogynistic, and it's the Democratic Party that's more progressive. Whether you believe that or not, but if you do believe that, that means that at some point those parties shifted, because that was not the nature of the origins of the party. So, that's part of that idea that we do have to evolve. Parties evolve, ideas evolve, individuals evolve, and we have to begin to evolve with that, and not necessarily to stick with dogma. Um, Kind of extremism in any form is going to breed division, and there's certainly extremist elements in both of the parties, because we also, as humans, we tend to be very extreme. It's very difficult for us to say I'm sorry, to say I was wrong, um, to ask for forgiveness. Like, very often we tend to double down. Again, I think COVID was a very amazing example of that. I mean, almost all of kind of the propaganda that came with COVID at the time and has since shown to be false. But where are the apologies? Where are the people being held accountable for? Where are the people who are willing to say, like, I messed up, and here's how we rectify this, here's how we remedy that? It's usually much easier, and that's also a very common kind of psychological way that we respond to those things, is through a trauma response. Is we tend to not want to look at our own actions. We want to sweep it under the rug because it's seemingly much easier, but then we carry the energetic imprint of all of those actions, and then we're never able to heal. And if we're not healing as individuals, then we're also not healing as a society. And I think that's maybe kind of another final point of that is, like, it's very easy to look at the other side and say they're evil, but the only reason that we're at where we're at is because that we as individuals, we as collectives, we're hurt. We haven't done our work. We haven't done our wisdom work, our deep self-inquiry work. So, always politics is just a reflection of the collective. Like, it's never any different. So if we're not happy with the collective, then probably a good place to start with that is to really look at ourselves and not to blame politics, not to blame the other team, not to blame other people, but to really look at ourselves. Also, I think, as Byron Katie very beautifully says, like, we often think it takes two people to end a war, but that's not true. It takes one. If one person ends the war, then the war is over, because there's nothing left to fight. There's no conflict that's there. So those are maybe some primary thoughts on what you brought up.
I'm gonna cry. I do Bowen's family systems therapy, which I guess you have to specify it's Bowen because it's different than regular family systems. But my therapist said there will be periods of time where he kind of has a phrase that he keeps saying, and for a while he kept saying, what if no one is to blame, but everyone is responsible? And I think that is touching on what you're saying, which is like, what if we stopped blaming and really took the responsibility to say, yes, this is painful and I want it to stop. And what do I need to do for this to end? And I recognize in myself how much easier it is to blame. I would so much rather say, it's hard to live in this house because of this person. It's hard to do what I want because of this. But then I'm never happy. And as soon as I start taking like responsibility, then I can live my life the way that I want it to be, and the world starts to become what I want it to be. Like you're saying, like, if you stop fighting, the war is over. And I think that something that I don't know if everyone's journey is the same, but at least in mine, it felt like I really just wanted to have someone recognize the pain that I'm in. Do you know what I'm saying? To just witness what I experienced and that it was painful. And for someone to just say, I see you and I witness that, and like to hold me in, and just love me for that pain, if that makes sense. Like, I think when you're a kid, I don't know what your life was like, but like, my parents did a bunch of stuff and I was like, this thing you're doing to me is hurting me. And they're like, oh, I guess I'm a terrible parent, right? And then we couldn't even talk about, well, hey, mom and dad, what pain are you in that this is being repeated with me? We couldn't even have that conversation. But now we're starting to have that conversation. And this is something that comes up for me, is that I think it was crucial for me in my healing to have people to hold me, even when I'm being venomous, right? I'm coming from the pain, to have people like not react to the pain, right? Like end the war. I love this. Like, they're not going to fight me. And then I'm just like, oh, whoa, whoa, what is all of this? Where's all of this coming from? And to just like have it all out to see. I don't know if this is true, but my therapist would sometimes say, sometimes we have to reenact the pain to see who we really are, right? Like, we have to kind of let it out to see, like, oh, is this who I really want to be? And I agree that we double down a lot, because sometimes, like, I definitely came from a place where I was like, I am not being forgiven for that. That was horrible. But to be surprised by being forgiven for that thing. And I think you were talking about, how, in the government, like, we kind of keep doing stuff and doubling down and just keep doing stuff, because I think we'd have to go so far. I've thought about this before, that like, wouldn't it be great if like, and the government is an entity, it's not even an individual. Like, who's the one who's going to go up and say, hey, America did a lot of stuff, sorry, like, who does that? And I agree, maybe it's the individual to acknowledge, because it does exist in them. I met someone the other day, and I thought this was incredible that they just voiced it. They said, I'm scared. I will admit that I'm scared that, how did they say? For like, they're white, right? So they were saying, I'm scared to admit that I don't know what would happen if everyone was equal. Like, if people of color were as well off as me, I am scared of that. And I was like, wow, like, thank you for saying that. Like, I think that's like, right, something that kind of looms over this country is like, people talk about racism and I don't know, whatever. So I guess my point is like, yeah, it'd be cool if there was like if the government was one person and all of this stuff was under like one thing, and it could just come out and say, hey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we did so many things. And we'd have to go layer by layer, like his moments in history, and acknowledge like the atrocities that happened. And I think we can do that, and we are doing it on an individual level, because I have all of these, I have history in me. I have, like, I can go to like anything that happened in history, and I feel it in my DNA of like, I know what was happening, and I was almost a part of it. Like, maybe we all have this collective understanding, this collective grief, collective pain, collective joy. And it can be healed on the larger scale as long as we're doing it in like our little microcosm. And I sat with the cacao farmer yesterday, and they were saying something about like staying in your lane, and how even in your life you affect 5 people. Like, if that is what you were meant to do, like, that's huge. And they were talking about like the potency of medicine, and how sometimes when medicine is outstretched, it loses its potency sometimes. But how, like, we are medicine in our little, and they're not little, in our worlds. Like, that just healing my relationship to this world, to myself, to family, to environment, to every relationship is all I can do, and it's crucial. And it's very hard sometimes, and I'm so grateful for the people who can hold it with me, right? Because we are alone. Like, the past few days, my partner's been away, and your partner's away too. But my partner's been away. He's putting a new transmission in his car. And I've been feeling how alone I am. I'm like, whoa, we are so alone. And I'm here by myself with all these, right, griefs and past pains and experiences, like, and I'm holding all of them, and I'm like, whoa, this is so much to do. And I'm so used to having someone to kind of, hey, I'm like, hey, can you look at this with me, but I'm like looking at it, and I just, yeah, I just think about a lot how, because we are alone, it feels really important to have people to hold all of this with, because we have to do it alone, but together it feels like, you know? So I appreciate your perspective, and how everything really is just a mirror, like even like you were saying, that was another thing I want to touch on. In the extremes, it feels like really what the other side is showing you is a part of yourself you don't want to admit exists. Do you know? Maybe, I don't know, maybe. Or a part of you that you needs to be understood. And
Well, that
and
was one of the classic kind of archetypes, like whatever people feel about Trump, whether you hate him, whether you love him. But, it still is such a common thing where people will say, like, I hate Donald Trump. And if you ask them why you hate them, they'll say something like, because he's racist or misogynistic, like essentially because he's hateful. They hate him because he's hateful. So, so it's exactly what you're saying. That's the idea of the mirror, is that's you are him. The hate that you see in him, you also embody that. But it's such a simple thing, and yet there's so much of a disconnect with people that they're justified in their hate, but someone else's hate is not justified. And that's usually why it's so triggering for people, is when they see that, it's unresolved hatred within themselves. Because again, if you really understand hatred in yourself, it's not about accepting it, or, much like you were saying about forgiving. It can be forgiving, but it can also be like not perpetuating it, not standing up
Mm-hmm.
for it. But you don't meet that same energy with the same energy, because that's just perpetuating the same energy. Uh, so, usually if you see something where you've really understood that in yourself, you've seen that in yourself, then usually you can approach it from a much deeper place, a place that can actually transmute that heal, or
Mm-hmm.
that trauma, or that negative emotion. Uh, you become someone who can then, as you said, heal, even if it's 5 people. And that's the nature of the work that we're doing. Working with plants, working in these wisdom traditions, is to embody, like to while it is for you and only you can do it, ultimately you begin to embody that wisdom, and it begins to affect so many people.
Mm-hmm.
Every person you come into contact with,
Mm-hmm.
every word you say, every action you take, and that has huge ripple effects through society. And it is a very personal process. Like, in general, when you go deep into plant work, like, you're not coming out saying, well, these are all the problems with the world, and this person needs to do this for me, and they need to, you know, make amends for all of their action. No, it's okay. Like, I understand
Mm-hmm.
why they did that. And that's not the energy that I want to embody. And this is the energy that I want to embody. And then I go forth and do it. There's usually not complaining, there's not anger, there's not resentment. We have to begin to embody the energy that we want to see in the world. Um, so yeah, those are, I think those are very fundamental points. And and everything is also relative, and so we also have to begin to understand that. Um, we look at world events and we're like, well, how could this country be going to war with another country? Like, what a evil country.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but again, we can't see that evil within ourselves. It's just, most of us, we don't have that amount of influence. Most of us were not world leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Thank goodness. Uh, but every time you get angry, every time you say something, or even more so, many people are afraid to say things, but every time you think
Mm-hmm.
it, that's that energy, and that is the energy of division. And so, um, again, it's and these are very old principles. I mean, it's the biblical idea of let he who is without sin cast the first stone. We all seem to understand that on an intellectual level, but most of us in our actions, we don't really embody that. We love to cast the stone. People love
Mm-hmm.
to cast the stone. It's him, it's my father, it's my mother, it's my boss, it's my partner. It's always their fault. Uh, Let who is without sin cast the first stone. Why is that so important? Because it means that first we have to look in ourselves and to see
Mm-hmm.
that we also are sinners. Everyone is a sinner, and not in a bad way. Like, again, that's the where etymology is so important. Sin means to miss the mark. It had to do with archers, and obviously, as an archer, you're
Mm-hmm.
always trying to hit the bullseye. You're trying to hit the center, but never do we hit the center. Like, even if you hit the center, it's still a hole that has some diameter, but how small does that hole get? Like, there, you will never hit the exact center. In the same way that there's no such thing as a purely straight line. I mean, depending on how infinitesimally small you get, there will always be something that's slightly off. But the idea is to hit the center. And so to sin means to not hit the center. And so we're always sinning in that way. To sin is to be human. To err is to be human. that's the etymology of the word yoga, to yoke. It means to
Mm-hmm.
steer the bull. Like if you were plowing fields and the bull was plowing the field, like he's never going to go in a straight line. And so your job is to rein him. If he's going too far to the left, to come back to the center. If it's going too far to the right, to come back to the center.
I heard like to come together. Is that what you
It
mean?
means also union, and
Mm,
that's that idea. It's the joining of the polarities. That's
mm,
the idea of like yin and yang. Is it's the polarities are trying to form union. Um, so with all of these things, like going back to that saying, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." Like we have to see that we all have error. We all are always trying to make the mark, and yet none of us are ever getting there. That's the process of our own evolution. That's the process of human evolution. That's the process of conscientiousness, consciousness evolving. We have to start with the self. We have to start with the self. That's the only place we can start. We cannot start with the other person, because ultimately we're not the other person in this dualistic world, in this world of matter made manifest. And so again, I think that's where most of our struggle comes from, is the inability to really see the other person, the inability of our own unwillingness to go into the darkness. Having said that, there's a very old alchemical process or wisdom that says all truth is half truths, meaning that essentially anything you say, there almost always is some exception to that. There's another way of looking at
mm,
things, and there's a deep wisdom in that. And that's where paradox comes from, and that's where even the idea of wisdom comes from, is not extremism. So to hold all truth lightly, at the same time to recognize
mm-hmm,
truth, because when we don't recognize truth, then it's very easy to be overcome by evil.
mm-hmm,
And that's the archetypal battle which you see in all spiritual traditions around the world. And I also think that's one thing that's kind of led to a furthering division, is that we've actually forgotten those archetypes of good and evil.
mm,
And when we forget those, we're much more susceptible to the forces of evil. Uh, we have to understand what is good, what is light, what is life giving. Only when we really understand that can we stand for that. And only when we stand for that can we see what's not that. And to then work on that, whether that's through words, through our actions, through fighting, through battling, through compassion. Different things require different energies, but we have to be
mm,
able to see that. And I think that's also a big issue we're facing, is we've very much gotten away from that, which again
mm,
is more of the kind of progressive idea in the goodness of that word, which is getting away from very rigid ways of looking at things. The extremism, though, which is very deleterious to that, is also forgetting that we do live in a dualistic world. And so there is a nature of light and dark. And if we forget that, then it's very easy for the devil to do
mm-hmm,
his work, because we've
mm-hmm,
forgotten what it means to stand in truth. There's a very beautiful saying. It's one of the reasons I really love martial arts. I mean, I've learned so
mm,
much from martial arts, but uh, a lot of these things are somewhat ephemeral. We can debate them, we can have different opinions on them. Martial arts, you can't. It's very straightforward. Um, you shake someone's hand and then you fight them, and one person
mm,
wins and one person loses, and the consequences are devastating. You win by knocking someone out, or by essentially breaking them. Uh, and if there wasn't a referee there to stop it essentially would be you kill them. That's the end goal of any any match, any battle. And so the consequences are literally life and death in its nature. Uh, and so there's very little bullshit, very little. There can be, but the propensity for it is very small. Because again, someone wins and someone loses in very dramatic fashion. And so the one who won is the one who had the better philosophy, the better technique, the better understanding. So it's a very powerful teacher. Like, you can't fake that. You stand across from another man or another woman, and there's no lying. There's no deceiving yourself. There's no deceiving the other person. There's no, my theory is better than you. Okay, we're going to see right now. And it's not like a game of chess where if you lose, you kind of shake the hand and you walk away and there's no harm done. There's very devastating consequences. And there was a very famous Japanese samurai. His name was Miyamoto Musashi. And apparently he never lost. Probably so, because he lived to be an older age and he wrote about it. So again, if you lost, you'd be dead. So you wouldn't be writing about it. So his skill was renowned. And, because also martial arts is a philosophy. It's an understanding of life. It's an understanding of the fundamental principles of nature, of weight, of leverage, of merit, of hard work, of understanding the dance of the human body, and probably even more so the dance of the human mind, overcoming fear, overcoming these forces of darkness within ourselves. But he has a very beautiful quote, and he says, reality is not what you want it to be. Or he says, reality is what it is. And you must bend to its power or live a lie. And, that's also pointing to these fundamental truths of there is a reality. And if we fight that reality, we suffer. Interestingly, that's also, I'm quoting a lot, that's another Byron Katie quote, which is, if you fight reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. And that's a very deep principle. And so much of our problems come because of that, because we fight reality. We fight who we are. We fight our life situations. We fight even the nature of nature itself. That a woman gives birth or that a man doesn't give birth. These very fundamental things. That we have a limited lifespan. That maybe in this human form I can't travel to another universe simply because of the vast nature of space and time. And yet, maybe my consciousness can. But first I have to accept that fundamental limitation of the body, of the nature of entropy, of who I am as a human being, what I am as a human being. If we fight that, we create a tremendous amount of suffering. If you go to the jungle, like where I lived in the Amazon, things eat each other. If your worldview is that that's bad, you're going to suffer because you're going to see a lot of death. You're going to see a lot of things that eat each other, and that's their nature. And it can't be bad because that's what God created. But we as humans, we tend to fight that, and we want to see things in the cosmovision or the belief systems that we think are good. And yet a huge problem with that is it's kind of that idea of the road to hell is paved with good intentions, is often by not accepting reality, wanting to change the world in a way that goes against reality. The consequences of that end up being far worse than the thing we were originally trying to correct. And also not understanding on a deeper level the beauty of that. It probably happens to people all the time, like you, or if you're, especially if you live closer to nature, like the other day, I came across a moth and it was getting attacked and eaten by ants. What do? Do you pick up the moth and free it and save its life? That's a beautiful thing to do. But then you also potentially cause the death of all of those ants that now don't have their food, their nourishment. Or do you let the ants eat the moth and nourish themselves, feed themselves, propagate themselves? But then you lose the life of the moth. And these are very, I think, difficult questions that people ask themselves. And kind of going back to this idea of politics, there's a very beautiful quote in economics, which is this idea that, nothing is inherently good or bad. There's only consequences. And every choice we make, we have to understand what those consequences are. And some people are going to suffer and some people are not going to suffer. Some people are going to like it and some people aren't going to like it. And that's the nature of reality. That's the nature of anything. Anything we do is going to have consequences. Any policy is not inherently good. It's not even necessarily inherently bad, but it's going to have consequences. And always we have to weigh those consequences. What are the good of them? What are the maybe not so good? And then go forward with that conviction. And we all do that. We all do that on a day-to-day basis. Every action we take, every thought we take, the words we say, there's always going to be some resonance of that. And I think we live kind of in a delusion where we think this idea that if I say goodness or if I say something that people should like, that everyone will like me. And that's just not the case, because again, no one is going to agree with everything we say, because nothing is inherently good. Something that may benefit even a vast majority of the people is going to be of detriment to some percentage of the people. And so it's really understanding that. And again, depending on your worldview, but even in the US, it's still a predominantly Christian country. So if you're a Christian, that should be very evident. I mean, the person who Christians view as the walking embodiment of God, the Son of God, his words were taken to be sacrilege. They were taken to be essentially demonic. They were taken to be extremely deleterious to the cosmovision at the time, so much so that he was crucified. And this is the person that so many people view as being the living embodiment of truth, of beauty, of wisdom. And yet the majority of people looked at him and said, no, that's divisive, to the point where, like I was saying earlier, we're willing to kill him because it's in the name of a greater good. So like there's always that energy there. And I think it's also really important, again, going back to that idea that like we're never going to be fully liked. And I think that's also where a big part of the problem of politics comes, and where a lot of fear comes from, is people want to be liked. It's a natural phenomena. They, as you said, they want to be held. They want someone to say, hey, it's okay. Like you're okay. Like whatever's going on, I'm going to hold you. And, we often, we tend to look towards higher bodies to do that for us, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a spiritual teacher, a pope, a monk. But I think also because in a lot of our Western culture, we become more and more kind of a-religious, moving away from religion, we often look to higher bodies. And a very common one is government or science, or, someone who can kind of promise us salvation, who can promise us the answers to our pain. And yet they never can. They never can. my stepmother is from Thailand. She's Buddhist, and I always thought it was so interesting that she would go to relationship advice, and for sure that was a good thing because living with my father isn't easy. But she would go to relationship advice from her Thai monk, and this guy had never been in a relationship in his life. And it's such an interesting thing, and that's also kind of going back to that idea of reality. We can have all the theories in the world, but unless you're in a relationship, very difficult to know what that really entails, to put to test all of our theories, all of our understandings. It doesn't mean that it can't be done, but difficult thing to go to advice about health and nutrition from someone who isn't healthy or eating nutritiously.
Mm-hmm.
If you want good advice about weightlifting, probably you need to go to a good weightlifter. But these are things that we've somehow got away from. And again, also the nature of humans, that we all do have this dualistic nature. And also this idea of government as being a force of salvation for us. And again, this is a huge subject, but just maybe briefly touching on it. I think a lot of this is really just a continuation of very old belief systems of needing a leader, of needing a king, of needing a ruler, of needing a pope, of needing someone who's going to do things for us, who's going to tell us everything's going to be okay,
And
who's
save
going to
us.
seemingly take care of us. Yeah, who's going to save us. And I think it's also very difficult for people to realize that that higher body or that higher force may also not have the best intentions. One, because they very well just may not have that knowledge, and two, because they're also people. And they're people who are going through their own things. And especially, when you couple that with the inherent nature of power, and anytime someone is receiving that kind of power, there's a tremendous responsibility that takes. And that's the nature even in this work. It's very rare to find people who aren't to some degree captivated by that power. Like, it takes a tremendous individual to be willing to harness that in, to be in good relationship with that. And again, these are very old spiritual principles. That's the seven deadly sins that we all have to come to terms with. Things like lust and greed, and this need of power. These things that inherently corrupt the individual. And in general, people seemingly above us haven't necessarily done that any better than ourselves. And often even people who are kind of considered experts in their field, that may not always necessarily be the case. Kind of going back to COVID, like how was that such a mass delusion? How did that affect so many seemingly intelligent people? How did we get away from things that we had known for hundreds, if not thousands of years? Things like natural immunity, the nature of viruses, the nature of isolation, the nature of dividing people. Like these aren't new things, and yet the power of fear, of accepting the orthodoxy of people who are seemingly higher than ourselves can lead to truly devastating consequences. So these are all kind of huge topics and just some of the things that come up.
I was at that last point. I was thinking, like, there's so many conspiracies about, like, people they did it on purpose, like not just COVID, but lots of things, right? Like, there's always this idea that it's this master plan, like, but I'm thinking, like, as an individual, I don't know if I always consciously chose to do things. Do you know what I mean? Like, that things were kind of, I just did things. Like, what if it isn't a master plan, but people are just, right, like you're saying, like coming from what they know and these past ideologies, thank you. And like that, I wonder if it's like it's easier for us to believe that it's this master plan and not just, because then again we can like blame and not just see that like maybe we are like making mistakes. I mean, and one of my favorite writers is Robert Anton Wilson, and his core belief was don't believe anything 100%, kind of like what you were saying, like nothing really is like a whole truth. So even like anything I say, I can always like negate myself or find a way to say, well, the opposite could be true, you know. And as I was listening to you, and like even presently in my life, where I will find a truth, but then also find the opposite, there is so much confusion. And I think people really want to know what the truth is, right? I think we do want some semblance of like knowing. And I think, I forget his name, but he's a Native American. And he wrote how, like, we are very confused and lost presently, people. And he said, you know, we never had this problem of not knowing who we are and what we're here for and how to be in relationship to things, and not to idolize. And like you said, like, I don't think any one or thing is perfect, but what have we gotten away from that is more close to truth? I met a person recently. He's very young. He's only 23. And he calls himself Wisdom. And he is writing, he's creating like a universal language. And he has all these theories about what he thinks God is and what he thinks, you know, he's talking about how we are all moving towards a one, right? Like unity. And I don't know if it's on like a physical or like what level of like, what does that mean to return to one? And is that the goal of evolution? And like, what is evolution? And I sit with these questions a lot, and maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's just we need to deal with what's at hand and just live our experience. And maybe like thinking about like, well, what is it all for? Maybe it doesn't matter. It's like kind of a distraction. But he thought that if there was a universal language, everyone could understand each other. And, you know, there's so much that it's like, what is it? What? Like, yeah, sometimes in my heart, like, I feel like I know, like, here's an example. When I did the first tobacco diet, at the end, tobacco was like, put me in soap. And I was like, what? And I never made soap before. And I was like, okay. So I made tobacco water. And for like hours while the tobacco was soaking in water, I would like sing and pray and like just really be with the tobacco in this process. And when I was making the soap, like there was so much intention of like that the tobacco wanted to be in soap so that people who could not receive tobacco through a dieta or through mapacho, or had like kind of a severed relationship to tobacco, they could have it in this form. And when I was initially making soap, that was the intention, was like, all of this medicine is medicine that I use in my life, and it allowed me to really deepen my relationship to all of the plants, and they were very small batch soaps, like maybe I'd make 10, right? And that was it. And I would go to the farmer's market, and people really were so drawn to the soaps, and I think the medicine was really potent. And then I think I was disillusioned, because then like a fear kicked in of like, you need to make money, and the soap business, this has to be a business, and this has to start making money, or else you're not gonna live, right? Like, so then the medicine kind of started losing its potency, and I was just like, all right, tobacco, you're soaking, go over there, and I'm gonna do all this other stuff. And I kind of got really disconnected to what I was doing, and like my connection to myself, I think, and also to the plants. Like, that was kind of the reflection. And then people stopped buying the soap, and I was like, what's going on? And then I like remembered, like, oh no, remember, like it became so stressful. And recently I like wanted to be outside, and I was like, you can't go outside, you have to do all this stuff for like to make money. And everything, I like, a lot of things I see is like, right, like this kind of way of being that feels very unnatural. And I'm like, wow, is it okay to just be in the nature and just have this connection, and have no expectation and no like desire to extract so much from the plants that I love and work with, and extract so much from the earth. And you this kind of came from a point that you were making of like, what are we meant to go to other universes? What is the human experience? Is it limited? And what do we get to experience with that knowledge of like, maybe I am supposed to just be here? And it's confusing, you know? Yeah, I don't. I've talked to a man who I met in a coffee shop who was a physicist, and I was like, what do you think evolution is? And he's like, oh, we're meant for space travel. We are meant to leave Earth. And there's like a part of me that's like, yeah, what else is evolution? Like, maybe we are supposed to go somewhere. But there was like a really deep sadness in that, of like, to just leave. He said, well, Earth will always be the home planet. And I was like, whoa, what a weird, is that it? Is that really? Like, so it feels like there is so much like confusion. And what I appreciate about this, oh my gosh, I wish I remembered his name. The Native American was kind of like, no, there's like a way to be, and it's very simple, and like, things, and you just live the life of like being with Earth and being in community with each other, and like a simplicity. And I don't know if like, that's a question I'm sitting with lately, is like, this is where we are. Where are we evolving to? Are we just evolving closer to, like you're saying, like healing, and recognize like what will it lead to? And maybe we don't need to know if, when we heal and we go inward and And also, like you're saying, like there will always be kind of this. And when I was in Guatemala recently, someone was like, well, we need to build a bridge so that we can all be here. And I was like, wow, is that possible? Like, because he was talking about, yeah, how like, and he was like, yeah, you guys in the United States, you're rich because we're poor. And I was like, whoa, that sucks. So, like, how do we get here? Is this possible? And, like, right, we see in nature, it's like you're either eating or you're eaten. Is that it? And, and maybe it changes, right? Like, that's kind of what people are afraid of for the United States is like, we're up here. The inevitability is like, right, Rome fell. So are we going to fall, and what does that look like? And is that just the nature? And I'm sorry again, that was like a lot of things, but this is just like, I'm kind of like excited and I want answers. I don't think I'm going to get any, but yeah, that's all I have right now.
Well, a few things came up, I think, when you were speaking. When you were speaking, I think in the beginning about kind of the nature of this evil, and is it just people kind of inadvertently doing it, or is there some conspiracy? Are there some higher forces? I think much is like you've been saying, we've been saying in this idea of half truths. It's both. In Taoism, I mean, in the Tao Te Ching, the main book of Taoism, it speaks about what a good ruler is, and essentially, like the lowest form of a ruler is someone who rules by force, by fear. Like, you do this or else. That works. Like, people will get things done out of fear. Kind of the second tier is someone who just kind of does it by saying things or by dictating, and also that's usually how things get done. That's probably more how, like in our societies, how things function. But they say the highest form of a ruler is someone who allows people to think that they've done it themselves. And that is the nature of a very good ruler, is not doing it by fear, not telling someone how to do it, but kind of being a mastermind. And then people feel, and they do it themselves. You empower people, you teach them, so that they then begin to embody and do it themselves, even though that kind of enlightened ruler is following the rules of nature. So kind of orchestrating this, dancing with this, but allowing the people to partake in that, to be part of that creative energy. I think that also has to do with evil. That's also the kind of highest form of evil, is that the evil can also work in that same way, that people end up doing it themselves without someone telling them that they need to do it. They begin embodying that energy themselves. I would say most things, it's the kind of the former of what you said. It's just people who do things because they don't know what else to do. They're coming from their own worldviews, their own traumas, their own lenses. But also in these spiritual traditions all around the world, you have these kind of huge archetypal ways of looking at the world, that there are, like God and Satan, forces of light, angels, and forces of darkness, that there's these epic battles that have happened since the beginning of time. And it's kind of that pendulum, that there is always this archetypal, apocalyptic, kind of cyclical, through the eons of these forces between light and dark, and that there's always this dance, there's always this play going on. And that's the embodiment of walking on a spiritual path, is to move towards God, to move away from the heavier forces that enslave human beings, that keep them in kind of the lower realms, the lower dimensions. So, I think that's both. It's, it's an interesting thing, that this idea that you bring up about like having everyone like at the same level. Um, this thing that this woman said, that like we're poor because you are rich. Again, there's a truth to that. I mean, that's part of, like, in economics, like a zero-sum game, that there's a limited pie, and that by me taking a piece of that pie, someone else has less of that pie. There's a truth to that. That's also not inherently how things work. For example, if you look at your iPhone, that's something that, or your smartphone, it doesn't have to be an iPhone, but I was looking at my iPhone. But in terms of, progression, that's something that takes less resources. Your phone is now a typewriter, a computer, a voice recorder, a compass. It has maps. Like, so all of these other things you actually don't need. And so actually, by certain progression, you can also feed back into the ecosystem. And that's the idea of things like regenerative farming, for example, that actually, by consuming or by doing something, you can actually give back. I mean, that's the ultimate idea of creation, is, anything that's a creative force is going to end up feeding. It's going to end up giving back. So all of these things, we have to look at them through a deeper wisdom. Again, anytime we have these kind of extremist views, inherently they're not going to be true. There can be truth to them, but they're not going to be de facto true. And also, I think, kind of going back to the more political side of that, I think that's also a huge problem, especially in the U.S., that we've really gotten away from. We've really forgotten the foundations of what the country was founded on. And I spoke a bit about that in the beginning, about this idea of a republic. It's not a democracy. It's a representative democracy, meaning in that certain decisions we vote on someone who makes a choice for us, because, again, the idea being that we can't know everything, so we vote for someone who knows better, who can make those decisions. But that's not the primary foundation of how the country was founded. That's why it's also not like the democratic state of the United States or something. It's the Republic of the United States of America. And a republic is built on a very different idea. And we're a constitutional republic, which means that we have this, and this is where I think words have power. And I'm not using this word loosely. Like, we have a sublime document called the Constitution, which is truly revolutionary, in that in every country of the world that I know of, your rights are given to you by your government, which means they can be taken away by your government. In the United States, our rights are not given to us by our government. They're given to us by God. That's a revolutionary way of thinking. Your God-given right to your life, your liberty, and your pursuit of happiness, or your property. It can also be said that those are inalienable, that they cannot be taken away, they cannot be infringed upon. No man, no woman, no system can infringe upon your right to your liberty, to your life. That is a revolutionary idea. It's not that by being born into a certain place, you're given these rights. It's that they're inalienable. Simply by being born, simply by being a human being, you have a God-given right to your life. that is a revolutionary way of thinking. That's never been the case unless you go back to more indigenous societies.
Sure, right.
That is a very kind of archetypal indigenous way of looking at things. That you don't have a de facto leader, that there isn't someone who's deciding something for you, that simply by being born, you are a child of God.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the big problems we've run into in the US is kind of as I was speaking about earlier, um, this idea, this infatuation of government. The U.S. was founded upon this idea of individual rights because of what I was speaking about, that the greatest minority is the individual. So if you protect the individual, then you protect everything. You protect every
Mm-hmm.
worldview. You protect every religion. You protect because even religion, okay, you can say, okay, there's Christians, there's Jews, but what about this religion and this and this?
Mm-hmm.
There's infinite religions, and ultimately your religion is who
Mm-hmm.
you are. And there's infinite ways of seeing the world. And by protecting the individual, you protect all of those. You protect all of them. Um, and so that was how the U.S. was founded, to protect the individual, to protect your ability to live your life, as long as you're not infringing upon someone else's right to live their life, how they choose to live their life.
Mm-hmm.
This is the good side of something like DEI,
Mm-hmm.
diversity, equity, inclusion. Unfortunately, we've gone to the extreme of that, which is that we now look to an organizational body such as
Mm-hmm.
the government to enforce
Mm-hmm.
what we believe to be something like DEI. But always, who's to say what that means? My view of that is going to be different from someone else's
Mm-hmm.
view. Their view is going to be different from someone else. What's important to me to protect is going to be different from what is important from someone else to protect. And so, first of all, anytime you have
Mm-hmm.
anyone deciding that, you inevitably alienate people, other people, you create division. And ultimately, the nature of the government is to do something by force. And I think people don't realize
Mm-hmm.
that. Because ultimately, anytime you have a law, anytime you have a policy, it's now a law. And it means
Mm-hmm.
everyone has to abide by that. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, if you don't, you could be fined, you could be jailed, but ultimately, it's with threat of force. If you don't follow that, someone will show up with force, with a gun, with whatever it is, 10 guys in armor, and make you by force to
Mm-hmm.
follow that law. Um, and so we've gotten away from this idea of this decentralized way of being into this more centralized way of being, that we need a government, a federal government. And I think a lot of people are probably even unfamiliar with that. When the country was founded, the federal government was essentially nothing. I mean, I think the original Supreme Court was in the basement of like some building. I mean, it was never used because you would almost never need to use it.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of a federal government was simply you needed to have some organization that represented the United States. Again, the United States, it's not one country per se, it's a group, it's a union of states, much like a union of individuals. But to
Mm-hmm.
be a representative of when those unions of states came together, essentially to represent in terms of anyone who's not in the US, meaning like essentially foreign policy, to be a representative of that. So it was a very small branch of government. It was the smallest branch of government. Um, and again, this idea of decentralization is true diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's again the individual first, then the family
Mm-hmm.
unit, then the community, then the state, and on the least degree, the federal level, the supra kind of national level. Uh, even going further than the national level. So I think a huge part is we've forgotten that, and we now
Mm-hmm.
look to the government, and especially the federal government, to impose our wants, our
Mm-hmm.
desires, our worldviews onto everyone,
Mm-hmm.
thinking that whatever I think, even if I think it's the best thing in the world, that
Mm-hmm.
it truly is good for all people, that all people, this is going to benefit them. And now I need to use this organization to force that
Mm.
onto everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's that idea that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. No matter
Wow.
what your idea is, even if it's the best idea and you really think it's the best thing for humanity, once you force that on everyone, you've already fallen
Mm-hmm.
into a trap of your using violence. Because inevitably you have to. Because if someone doesn't
Mm.
choose to partake in that, then you have to make them. Otherwise, it's not a real law. It's not something that actually holds up. So
Wow.
by doing that, I think we've gotten to a point where we've forgotten kind of the fundamental nature of the United States, and that is going to be somewhat messy. It does mean that there's going to be people who have different views from us.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be people who believe in different things. Um, and you can see this in anything, and obviously these topics can be triggering to people, but I think a really good example is something like abortion. What is the answer? The answer is that nobody knows.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has an answer to that, because it comes down to a fundamental question of when is something alive? When does consciousness start? And I think the true answer is that no one truly knows that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when do you decide as a society, because that is part of the role of society, is to
Mm-hmm.
protect an individual. So when do you recognize that someone is an individual?
And we
Is
can't
it at
all agree.
conception?
Mm-hmm.
Is it at 2 weeks? Is it at 5 weeks? Is it at 13 weeks? Is it the moment they come out of their mother? Is it at 5 years? There's really no answer. And so you have
Oh.
these huge debates that really divide people. But if you really sit down and talk to someone, usually people really haven't thought these things through very much. We have some kind of worldview that there is like an answer, and then you have these teams, but even those teams, they have no consensus on it. So is it at,
Mm.
15 weeks? Is that the magic number that, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you can agree that, okay, that's the answer. And after that, you can't, before you can. Is it at conception? Like, that's also a very valid argument, that at the moment of conception, that's now an individual, and you can't abort it. Is it at the moment where it leaves at birth, when it leaves the mother's body? That's a very valid argument. You can argue for that. There's groups, many groups in the Amazon, for example, like the Shipibo who I work with, many groups who they often don't name the child until around like
Mm.
5, 7 years old. And the reason they
Mm-hmm.
don't name the child is because they believe that the child is still kind of another world. It's not fully embodied. It doesn't fully have a soul yet. So until the child has a soul, you don't give it a name. Uh, and you even have cultures that practice infanticide, meaning they will kill the child if they feel they need to for some reason.
Mm.
Maybe the tribe can't support it,
Mm.
or they feel it's damaged in some way. They'll kill the child even maybe at 4 years old, and they don't view that
Wow.
as a form of murder,
Right.
because they don't view that child has a soul.
Mm.
Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have an answer to that. And the
Mm-hmm.
truth is, nobody has an answer to that. Do you allow that to happen, or do you not? Whatever rule you make on some national level, you're going to ostracize huge
Mm-hmm.
portions of the population, because again, almost no one is going to agree on when that
Mm-hmm.
moment is. You may have a huge consensus, but you know my guess is that most people in the US would look at those Amazonian people and say, well, they're insane. That's crazy. You can't
Mm-hmm.
kill a kid at 4 years old. Certainly in the US, you can't. That's considered murder.
Mm-hmm.
And yet for them, it's not. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you deal with that? And so all of these things are this idea of a more decentralized system to honor, even though you may not agree with, is it at conception? Is it at birth? Is it at 4 years old? Is it at 15 weeks? You're not going to agree on that, but no one is. So how do you come to terms with
Mm-hmm.
that? Well, you have a decentralized system where you put that in the hands of as few people as possible. And so for your view or your community or your group or your state, that's what it is. And that's what I mean, that always these things are going to have trade-offs. Like there is no necessarily correct answer to any of these things. And in some of these cases like that, there's huge trade-offs. I mean, that's a very big subject because it also goes to bodily autonomy, to death, to life. Very, very fundamental principles. And yet most people want to have their worldview imposed on everyone else, believing that they have the answer. And so that's always again going to cause division, to cause problems, and and again, I think that's a big thing that we've forgotten, and that we've moved away from these more decentralized systems. I think luckily more people are beginning to maybe understand that in terms of government, in terms of money. I think a lot more people are understanding the power of decentralized systems. I think that's why things like cryptocurrency are becoming more popular, because people also realize, like, when you give any organization, whether it's the federal government, the Federal Reserve, which is actually not related to the federal government, but when you give one organization the power to control everything in their field, it's ripe for corruption. That's what a monopoly is. They can do whatever they want, and there's no thing that can compete with that. But as you move to more decentralized systems, that's also the essence of nature. Nature, as we look around, there's all sorts of different life forms. There's all sorts of different plants and animal, flora, fauna, all in this like amazing dance. Can you say there's an organizing force behind it? You could, but probably the only force that then you could say in that regard is God. And God, you could say, is truth and goodness. But there's nothing other than God. There's no lower form than God that's telling all of those things. You have to do this, or you can't do this, or you can grow here, or you can't grow here. There's this amazing harmonic dance, which is so far beyond our comprehension. And also the idea that we as humans can orchestrate that is quite crazy, and it's also a very archetypal story, and this is what I also find so interesting about history and traditional native cultures all over the world, is they all have these very similar stories of the fall of the gods, the fall of man, these stories of like Atlantis, that you had these huge, amazing kind of primordial civilizations. But the reason that they eventually fell is because they thought that they were gods, and they acted in that way. They tried to start to control the world. And it could be said that that's ultimately the downfall of man, is when we try and pretend like we're gods. And these aren't, that's where I find these stories fascinating, these flood myths, which you find all over the world. And even that story of Atlantis, it's not just a Greek kind of Western story. I mean, where I was living in the Andes, that said the ancient name of the Andes, that's more of the Spanish way of pronouncing it, is the Antis. And it used to be this huge, amazing civilization, but that they eventually fell in the cataclysm. You also had another huge civilization, more a coastal civilization, Amazonian, or even, interestingly, in Mexico, the Aztec civilization, their language was Nuatla, and Atla means of the water, and the Atla were also apparently a very advanced, huge civilization. So you had the Atla and the Antis, you had the Atlantis.
Wow.
But these are the stories, these are stories of time immemorial that people lost their role. They tried to become gods, and ultimately God, or, higher forms of God, sent these kind of cyclical cataclysmic events to reset humanity, to in a way to prostrate humans, to make them kneel before the Creator, and because they had forgotten who they are, where they come from. And that's the origin of a lot of this plant work is that's why God or the God sent these plants to humans, is so that we could remember who we are
Mm.
and where we come from, because we've forgotten, and when we forget, there can be, as we see, devastating consequences to that.
Mm. Wow. I'm digesting. It's important to know history and the meaning of
Very
words.
important to know. That's where most of our problems come from, is
It's,
because we've forgotten.
mm-hmm,
On a fundamental level, like these indigenous stories are saying, we've forgotten who we are, and we've forgotten where
mm-hmm,
we come from.
mm-hmm,
We have this amnesia, and these plants or these ancient
mm,
sciences are trying to help us to remember, so that we can embody that energy of God, which isn't one of control or force or manipulation, but it's one of this life-giving energy.
mm,
But we've become removed from that, and it's a beautiful part, I think, of this plant work, which is, again, this idea of wisdom, of remembering, of not forgetting. Um, you know,
mm,
there's an energetic imprint of everything, even as you were saying, within you. There's an energetic imprint of everything.
mm-hmm,
We are the seed of the universe. The matter of the universe exists within us. It's this kind of hippie way of saying things, but we literally are of the stars. Like,
mm-hmm,
there's no new material out there. Like, everything
mm,
comes from something. That's that idea of union, of source.
mm-hmm,
So there, we have access to these things, and there's been all of these practices, these sciences, these deep sciences, these deep technologies to help us to go into that. And again, I think a lot of how our society is moving is because we've forgotten those things. And much like this pendulum, as we begin to forget them, we begin to suffer more. And as we begin to suffer more, we find ourselves in situations that reflect that. And also, I think that's why an emergence or a re-emergence of a lot of these ancient practices,
mm-hmm,
because of our suffering, we're beginning to remember, to if nothing else, out of necessity. Much like you were talking about, even these things of maybe realizing that the planet may be finite, that can we keep extracting? Can we keep destroying it? Are we able to go to other planets? Is that part of our evolutionary journey? These are very, very deep questions, and I think questions that people have been asking for a long time. And again, when you look at a lot of these indigenous cultures, they also do say that either we came from or we had a relation with the stars,
mm,
and that is part of our evolutionary journey. And much like your home, your house, your body, you have to take care of it. If you don't take care of
mm,
that, then your journey ends, and you have to
mm,
restart with more wisdom and learn to
mm,
take care of your house.
mm, mm. Yeah, there's a few things sitting um, to kind of, yeah, I when I was in Peru, um, we had this a local did a tour guide of Machu Picchu, and it wasn't like a typical tour guide, of like, hey, this is this and this is. He kind of really went into the depths of. No, he was beautiful. He was just very connected to the land and just really a beautiful person with a lot of wisdom. And he was telling us that the story that they believe what happened was because if you look at Machu Picchu, there's the Incan structure and then there's pre-Incan structures. So, and they're very different. Like the pre-Incan are, I I don't know if you've been to Machu Picchu. I'm sure you have, but the pre-Incan is like cut like straight. They're huge monolithic rocks or stone. Like it's like, how did they do this, right? And then the Incan is still so beautiful, but not as, the precision is different. I would say different categories of precision, and maybe the intention. I'm not sure, but he was saying that what they believe is that both were existing at the same time. That if you look at the Incan structures, they were kind of built to honor the pre-Incan, that they believed that they were all living at the same time for a moment, but that the Spaniards were coming and the pre-Incans like knew that this wasn't going to be good. And he said they left Earth. And I don't know like how we prove that or whatever. I don't know if that has like whatever kind of, if it just means something, but yeah, that's, he said that's our story. And it's like, okay, but yeah, that there's like, and then the Incans stayed and they got killed by the Spaniards. So and also in Robert Anton Wilson's book called Cosmic Triggers, he was friends with Timothy Leary. And Timothy Leary, at one point in time, was in prison. So I don't even know how this was able to happen. But him and like his partner, another prisoner, and that prisoner's wife, they all did like LSD together. And they received transmissions that they call. And the transmission was really beautiful. It basically said like, all life on Earth needs to come home, and you all need to unite and kind of evolve past hatred and evolve past race and this and that. Like you, it said you are meant for immortality, and you need to return to your star family. So, and in my, and the world is so interesting how my cosmovision has definitely been like, I was introduced to Philip Dick and Robert Anton Wilson and all these people who talk a lot about the dog star, like different stars, and the stars were very present in my life in different times, and even in ancient Egypt, like I think the Sphinx faces the dog star. Like they were building these structures to kind of, as I don't know if they were communications or what. I need to refresh my memory, but so it is interesting, like that. I've heard of this through different contexts, and yeah, and plants are so interesting, working with the different plant medicines and the things that they say. Sometimes it's kind of like, I'm going to take this with a grain of salt, because if I really dive into what you're telling me, like, it's going to be a little crazy, like, which is why I kind of, that's what the beauty of all the different plants are. Like, tobacco is very different than, it feels like tobacco is both, I get shot out to other places, but it's also very like in touch with my human experience, like what needs to happen on a human level, but also like you kind of go to all these other places and get to travel a little bit. So, but like mushrooms sometimes feels very like, yeah, they're like, this is where you came from. And I'm like, whoa, really? Like, where am I? So the plants are interesting. But the other point I wanted to make, what you were talking about, like politically, like how we are giving our power to these, like the government to impose decisions. I recently got a phone call And she said, "Hi, I'm just calling to take a poll for the local government. Do you have a moment to answer some questions?" And usually I hang up, but I was like, "No, I will answer these questions." And she asked me if I knew who this person was who was running for office in November, and if I was planning to vote in November. And she said, she started talking about, do you believe that people who have children or are adopting or need to take care of someone, do you believe that they should receive aid? And it's like, oh, yeah, they should have like help, right? Like, and I really was thinking about like, if I had a child, I would want like community and resources, right? Like we would like them to have a good life. So I was like, yeah. And then like she kept asking the question in different ways, and then she said, well, okay, if this bill is passed to give people this aid, the taxpayers are going to, like, the taxes are going to go up like literally $1 billion, she said. And I was like, whoa. And, Pennsylvania, the minimum wage is $7.50. It's, you don't make a lot, but the cost of living is cheaper here. So it balances out. But I was like, wow, well, that's crazy. Like, what if people, so like what you're saying, like, so this is going to impose on everyone, but she was like, okay, so it'll basically cost $200 more a year for individuals. But then also for some reason, then she was saying, would you still vote for this if this percentage of people lost their jobs? Because apparently that would be in effect too. And I was like, whoa, like, so it wasn't black and white. And I said to her, I was like, I can't, like, this is not black and white. Like, no, like, now I don't support it, but in this instance I support it, and in this one I don't, because what you're saying, like, now it's infringing on everyone. And what if everyone doesn't want, which it's good things, right? It's like if a woman has a baby, that she gets leave for 3 paid medical leave. Like, yes, I do believe she should be with her baby. But then it's like, okay, but these people are going to lose their jobs, and these people are going to pay this much more in tax money. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And so, like, I struggle. Like, I'm hearing what you're saying, and it's like, well, then what is the answer that, like, then I think of, like, maybe we're too big, that if you believe in this and a bunch of other people believe in this, maybe they all pay into that. And then, but not everyone has to. And can it be like that, so that we aren't enforcing so much? Because what might be helpful to one person is like restricting and devastating for the other person. So yeah, like, how do we go about that and have more of a malleable, where things can be gray, instead of you either have this or you don't have this? You can, and I guess, like, that's healthcare, right? It's like, you can have healthcare, you got to pay for it. So I don't have healthcare right now because I'm like, but right, and what a, right, a moral dilemma. Should other people pay for my healthcare? Should we all take care of each other? And I feel like in smaller groups, you can, right? Like, if it's a tiny little village of like 20 people and there's like one medicine person or whatever, right? That's like manageable, but it's like there's so many people and not everyone is in the same situation. And that's something that's been coming up again politically, but like in a familial system. My partner's father has been in prison for 18 years, and he's wheelchair bound. He relies on dialysis. And basically, in December, they are going to kick him to the curb because his parole is up, and that's what they're like, okay, bye. They don't need to find him housing. right? So for years, we've been all meeting once a week, and we're like reaching out to these systems, right? Like the government, like, you need to help him, help us find housing. Like, where's their housing? And he's a sex offender, so no one will, right? No one will take him. And even the word, they have him labeled as a violent predator. And when you look at what actually happened, it's not the truth, right? Like, we're talking about truths, and like, the more we all meet and we're talking about what happened, it's like, because it was with my partner, and we're finding truth. And the truth is not that he is a violent predator, right? Like, the truth is much more complicated than that. And on a human level, if we understood what actually happened, people would be like, oh yeah, come on, come live with me, But there's like, so we're relying on the system, and we're like, you need to find him housing, find him housing, find him housing. And they're not finding him housing, right? And it's like, this keeps coming up for me of like, what if it's in our hands to take care of each other? That we don't need to rely on and put it on the system and enforce something, but that we can collectively, his community and the people who love him and care about him, like, what can we do to enact something without, like, I don't know, infringing on or relying on something that has no real relationship to us, or like functions at a human level either, So yeah, that's where I'll end that. But yeah, that maybe these systems aren't meant to be. They, yeah, like, where can we find humanity in these systems? And again, but it's complicated, right? Because what you might want is not what I want. So yeah. So thank you for like all that insight. I feel like I have so much to continue to sit with and reflect on. But that was really insightful. Thank you, Jason.
It's big questions, and questions people have been dealing with since probably time immemorial. But again, I probably not going to solve that today. But again, probably the simplest way of looking at it is, again, this idea that everything has a cost, and so it's just what is the cost, and what are we willing to accept and not. And as you said, everyone's going to have very different views on that. So I think that's the beauty of decentralization. Like, again, it's never going to be perfect because there's always a cost, there's always a trade-off. But I think in general, that gives you the best chance of, as you said, like, creating a life that also resonates with you, and not having other people infringe upon that. Because we do, we also have very different views, very, very different wants, very different desires. And, and at the same time, I think there is something beautiful that you kind of mentioned, which is this idea that this Native American guy said, which is kind of this idea that there is a good way of living. And I think that goes back to these ideas of these kind of fundamental truths. Because again, we are human beings, and we can't run from that. Like, we do need connection. We need love. We need fresh water. We need food. And no matter how advanced we get, or what kind of chemicals we come up with to kind of substitute food, it will never be the same. And then there's a trade-off to that. So all of these things, it's like this pendulum. Like, we can, like, We can have like some fast food now and then, but if that becomes all of our food all the time, then we will have to slow down.
There's a
We'll
consequence.
we'll
Yeah.
have to eat slow food because we'll become out of balance. So it's big questions. In terms of like the kind of star beings that is a very common tale that you find in many traditional indigenous societies is, as you said, like in the Andes, this idea. And, I think there's a lot more evidence that's kind of pointing to that. I think it's one of the amazing things about technology, about us coming closer as humans, as the world becomes smaller, is we can understand more of these origin myths. We can hear more. We can cross-reference them. We can reflect upon them. We can find the wisdom in them and see the commonalities of them and see that there are these signposts that are still with us. I mean, it's one thing to study Machu Picchu. It's another thing to go there. It's one thing to understand a megalithic site. It's another thing to really be in the presence of it. And as you said, there's a very different technology. Like the higher up you go, it's a much, I don't want to use primitive because it's still a very beautiful technology, but it's more primitive than at the bottom, at the older, at the base. And I think there's more and more evidence. I think we live in a really exciting time where kind of even our whole cosmovisions, our whole worldviews, we're maybe having to start to rethink them. Even these things like angels and demons and these forces, as you said, if people begin to take things like mushrooms or ayahuasca or tobacco, whatever it is, their cosmovision is going to change. And we take fairies or something to be a metaphor, but maybe it's not. We take angels to be like a metaphor, but maybe it's not. These ideas of these past advanced civilizations, we take them to be metaphors, but maybe they weren't. And it's very fascinating that all over the world you have these very similar stories, these very similar legends pointing towards something. And I think that's again part of this kind of collective amnesia and this process that we're going through of remembering. I don't know if you saw, but even recently, I mean, it could be untrue, but probably more verification is still needed. But a group of Italian researchers came out, and in the Khafra pyramid and the Giza plateau, what they're saying is that they use some new technology, this kind of sonar technology. It's using sound, I think, resonance, and then taking that data and using, I think, AI of 3D mapping it. And according to them, under the Khafra pyramid are these 8 cylindrical tunnels that have this spiral structure within them that goes 645 meters deep. I mean, that's something like, I don't know, 1,500 feet deep. And that they link up to these like 80-meter, I think in diameter, square cubic chambers, and like the whole structure goes something like 2 kilometers deep. I mean, that's unfathomable, and certainly unfathomable by the narrative, which is these things were built by rocks and copper chisels. I mean, even again, like standing in front of the Great Pyramid, it's pretty awe-inspiring. It's pretty hard to look at that and think that that was built 2,000 years ago by people with 2,000 years of more primitive technology than we have today. When you stand in these megalithic sites like Sacsayhuaman, like Machu Picchu, Ollantaytambo in Peru, all over the world as they're discovering more of them. The Mayans, there's probably thousands of these pyramids that they're now discovering. The astrological alignment of such precision within the individual sites, but also in relation to these sites that were somehow seemingly not connected all over the earth, the astrological significance of the earth, the mathematical symbols that were contained in these sites, like the Great Pyramid, that showed that they had an understanding of the speed of light, of the circumference of the earth, of things like precession. I mean, these very advanced things that were built into these pyramids and structures. And again, then you have these tales of, like you said, in the Andes, of a cataclysmic event that came, or the Spanish who came, and these kind of more advanced beings who just decided to leave the Earth to go back to a different star system. And that's not unique to them. Like you find that all over the world. And I do think a lot of these plant medicines, we were saying, like the physical distance of time and space, of the distance between these planets and galaxies. It's so difficult to even fathom on a physical level. But that's why these plants and these practices were called plant spirit practices, because it wasn't the physical body that was going there. It was the spirit, it was the consciousness. And in that space, I think many people have probably experienced that they were able to go to other dimensionalities, to other planets, to communicate with star beings, to communicate with fairies, and that experience is real. It's as real as anything. From a shamanic point of view, they would say it's even more real, because we're not bound by our earthly body, by these laws of entropy and time and space, and that we have the ability to travel, to journey, which is even the colloquial term often of working with these substances, is that we're able to journey. We're able to journey to places, to states, to dimensions, if we like that word, that we don't have access to in our normal state of consciousness. And so I think there's a huge frontier that's beginning to be, again, re-explored, not for the first time explored. That's part of, I think, our ego, is that we like to think that we're the first. But these are ancient practices, ancient technologies. And that it's amazing that we still have traces of them, even from potentially hundreds or thousands of years of things being lost, that there are still things like the pyramids in physical form. There are still plants in the form of a physical matter that give us access to a spiritual experience. And I think that's a big part of our technology of the future, our process of evolving as humans, as individuals, as species, into things we potentially could never even dream of. And yet that's the paradox. And yet we still are humans. We're still at home in our body, and we're still of this earth, of this soil. We're still humans. That's what a human means. It comes from like humus, like the soil. We are of this soil. We are of this earth, and we will always be. Our physical bodies will always be part of that, and that's always a huge part of our journey. Is always remembering our form, our home, our place in this earth, and that we're spirit, and the potentiality, the vastness, the awe, the inspiration that opens us to, and so it's this dance. And that's why, also I think all of these things, these political things, I mean, people take them very seriously, and there is something serious to be taken, because that is the physical part. That's part of the human experience, and it is very important. And to always remember the relativity of things, and to putting things in perspective of time, and the vastness of not only this earth, but of where we come from, where we are in this universe, and not to get too caught up in the shenanigans, the Maya, as they say, all of this dance, this dizziness of life, because there's things that are also much more important than that. And also, as I think we begin to focus on things, we also can approach these things of this earth in a much wiser place, in a place of much more compassion, in a place of relativity, and from a place of a very deep wisdom, a very deep knowing, really seeing ourselves as part of the interconnectedness of life. And I think that's our journey, and I think that's where we're going.
I don't want to say anything else. I feel like what a beautiful way to leave us off on our journey.
Well, that sounds good. I think that that's a good place to end. And yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Samantha. It's always a pleasure. It's a pleasure connecting with you. I mentioned this the last time, but you have a beautiful presence, beautiful energy. That inquisitive nature is vital. It's vital for our times to really be able to question things, to think about things, to reflect upon things, and that's where truth emerges from. That's where wisdom emerges from, and you know, you have a beautiful connection to these plants, which truly are teachers. And I think that's a big part of our path, is really beginning to embody the wisdom that's there, that's all around us, and that we've been given this gift of having access to them, and to really spread that, to share that wisdom, because that is our light, that is our gift, that is our act of creation, and that's the true embodiment of that God energy, is to create in the way that God creates, from that place of union, from that place of beauty, and to really spread that beauty.
To create from a place that God creates. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for just always having, I feel I drank some cacao before this, and I just asked that, we have a conversation that comes from love, and that is life-giving, and I feel that you really are in this neutral place of love and of the right direction, and like the right path. And thank you for the work that you do, and helping us and helping me, and listening to the plants and letting them speak through you and God. And I'm just grateful for this time, and you like wake things up in me, and I really appreciate it. And I'm sure whoever listens is going to be very inspired, and so thank you.
It's a pleasure, Samantha. Thank you for having me on.